The Last of Us is one of the most influential video games ever made. The original one came out at a time where AAA games were just veering slightly towards a more cinematic experience, and instead of slightly veering, Naughty Dog took the wheel and fucking jammed it in the direction of the story. It really set the standard for strong video game narratives going forward. It was such an impressive story that HBO picked it up and adapted it into a 9-episode series, touting Craig Mazin as the showrunner and getting Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey as the main two characters, Joel and Ellie. I actually really liked the adaptation. I think the story was always going to translate well to TV. The performances were great all around, and even the deviations they took from the game I thought were generally okay, with some real highs and lows scattered in there. But if there's one thing that I really felt let down by, it was the show's lack of violence and the threat to the characters. Now, I understand that makes me sound like a psycho, but just let me explain. The world of The Last of Us is cruel and horrific, and every act of violence feels completely in place for how hellish this landscape is. In the game, every encounter with the hunters or the infected is a brutal fight for survival. Resources are scarce, enemies are relentless, and death can come at any moment. The constant presence of danger makes the world feel oppressive. The environment is as much a character as Joel or Ellie, which I think really helps with understanding in why this mission across the United States is such a Herculean task. When you're playing, it really feels like the world is against you, constantly churning out threat after threat. It feels like you never really get a break until you do. The beauty in having a world this dangerous is that the handful of quiet times allow you to really take in the emotional weight and the beauty of the moment you're in. And as you, the player, soften your defences, you find yourself focusing on the characters rather than thinking about when the next threat is going to reveal itself. The show, however, significantly reduces the number of action-heavy encounters. The infected, in particular, are far less present than they are in the game, appearing in only a handful of episodes. This makes the environment feel way less hostile, and as a result, those quiet moments aren't so impactful, as they aren't as much of a departure from the norm like the game. The human opponents are fleshed out with explanations on why they're doing what they're doing, which on paper isn't a negative thing, but when you actually experience it, the enemies are suddenly no longer scary, but more an empathetic opposing force. For example, in the game, the Kansas City Hunters are these ruthless killers who ambush, torture, and murder anyone who enters their city. Players see firsthand just how brutal they are, making every encounter with them tense and terrifying. In the show, however, these raiders are given a backstory with a leader who has personal motivations for her actions. I think while this adds depth, it also makes them feel less like this evil presence and more like misunderstood survivors. While the show still presents this bleak post-apocalyptic setting, the show world loses an important element of its tension, making these encounters seem less like the constant struggle for survival the game portrays, and more like the occasional inconvenience or hurdle for the characters. In the game, violence is more than just fun action, it serves as a visual reminder of the harsh realities of this world. I mean, straight from the get-go, you spring straight into a violent assault on another survivor gang, this gameplay section culminating with Joel having murdered a dozen people just to get to the person he wants. He is clearly someone that is defined by his ruthlessness because he has to be to survive this world. Now, the show follows a similar intro, except instead of hitting guards with a brick, he hits the bottle with a perk. The show has this pattern of swapping out the visceral violence of the world with these more complex sections of internal violence. Joel is shown to be a broken man in both formats, but the way they get it across is very different. Another example of this arises with David and his cannibal group. In the game, one of the biggest oh fuck moments is when David explains that he's the leader of the men that Joel and Ellie murdered in the previous chapter of the game, with David describing Joel as a crazy man. Now, game Joel, I think I can understand a description of crazy man. In the show, however, that description is not applicable in the slightest. Joel kills one man in self-defense and then immediately runs from the others. It's possible that David's group lied to him in the show, but I think it works better when you don't have to imagine something like that, and you can actually understand why they've described Joel the way that they have. I think the chapter that suffers the most from the lack of violence is the ending, with Joel's assault on the Firefly Hospital. By that point, the game has had you play for several hours, moving from one violent act to another, so the final massacre is just another instance of Joel doing what he's always done, but on a much larger scale. His willingness to kill is taken to its ultimate extreme. In the show, however, this moment feels completely disconnected from the rest of Joel's character arc. Up until this point, he had been portrayed as a more reserved and hesitant fighter, someone who really only kills when absolutely necessary.
Please don't do it. Please.
Then suddenly in the final episode he goes on a rampage, gunning down dozens of fireflies without hesitation. There's no build up to this moment, no previous scene that truly establishes that Joel is capable of such an overwhelming display of violence. Whereas Game Joel's brutal nature is a constant presence.
Take it easy, man.
Holy shit, Joel.
Making his final assault on the fireflies a logical and emotionally powerful moment. He's doing the one thing he knows to protect the one thing that he loves. I think for a TV show, having these small character study episodes and having these mounting instances of increased panic and mental turmoil is absolutely fine. It's just when they take those physical violence moments from the game and put them in this somewhat tamer version of the story and they expect the same impact. I just don't think it works. The second season of the show is only a few weeks away, and while I'm excited to see that game brought onto the screen, I can't help but have concerns as well. The first season really shied away from some of the game's constant brutality, but ultimately it's still an enjoyable watch, as the game's themes can still be expressed without it. To a lesser degree, sure, but they can still be expressed.
There you go.
The second game, however, oh boy. If they follow the first season and just throw in a couple of the key moments with none of the violence in between them, I can't help but imagine how depraved the season is going to be for the TV audiences. Like I said at the beginning, I really did like the adaptation, but man, I really hope with Season 2 they actually embrace the harsh realities of the source material and they trust that the audiences can handle the uncomfortable levels you get taken to in that story.